Hello and welcome to our first Utabrew box of 2022. We hope you had a fantastic festive season and saw in the new year with friends and family. Let's get into the first Utabrew box of the year, Ultimate Tej. This recipe is inspired from the traditional beverage called tej, which is traditionally made in Ethiopia and Eritrea. What makes tej special is an ingredient called gesho enche, which accentuates honey characteristics. Gesho is typically drank from a long neck bottle called berele. The reason for this is that drinkers can put a cork in the bottle between sips to make sure that fruit flies and other insects can't get into their beverage. So that's the background out the way, but what are we going to need to make this beverage? Well, alongside our Utabrew box, you're also going to need an appropriate sized bucket. So if you have our standard or honey box, that will be a 7 or 10 litre bucket. And if you have our 25 litre bucket, it will be a 30 litre bucket. It's really important to have a little bit more space in the vessel to make sure that it doesn't foam over or explode out. No one wants that. The lid will also have to be fitted with a grommet for our airlock. We fill our airlock with sanitizer, and that allows gases produced from fermentation to escape, whilst not allowing insects or other nastiness from the outside world into our mead. You're also going to need a spare vessel for your sanitizer solution, a spoon to mix your mixture together, a hydrometer and test jar for taking your hydrometer readings, and some scales to measure out your honey if you have one of our boxes that don't come with the honey included. A turkey baster for taking our hydrometer readings. Also, a spray bottle's handy to fill up with diluted sanitizer, as it's great to wipe down our work surfaces and for your hands. So that's all the equipment we need for brew day. Let's get to unboxing our box. Upon opening the box, the first thing that you'll see is our recipe letter. This is going to be really important for later. Pop this to the side. We're also going to have a number of sachets which are labelled A, B, B2 and C. Pop that to the side as well. A sachet bag. Some sanitizer pre-labelled. Our caps. And in the internal box you will find our yeast for this mead. This yeast is a liquid yeast, and to ensure safe shipping we have included a cooling packet. You can go ahead and cut the corner off, drain this down the sink and recycle it. It's all biodegradable. And then our sachet of Y yeast 1388 here. One last thing, don't forget your labels at the bottom of your box. We're going to be using everything in the box today aside from sachet C, our bottle caps and our labels. Pop them somewhere safe because we'll be needing them later. So our first step is we need to ensure that all of our work surfaces are sanitized. You can do that by using a spray bottle or by dropping a little bit on the surface and giving it a wipe down with a cloth. I've already sanitized the work surface, including my hands, so let's get started. The first thing we need to do is activate our Y yeast smack pack. Inside the packet, there is an extra packet which has nutrients, and we need to make sure that we smack that so that erupts and causes that to mix with the yeast, activating them. Get the nutrient pack into a corner, and then quite simply, give it a smack. Now give it a really good shake, make sure that's all mixed together. Have a feel around. If you still feel that packet inflated in there, give it another smack until you manage to erupt it, and then place it to the side. That will begin to swell as we carry on, which is an excellent sign of yeast activity. To measure out your sanitizer, follow the guidance on your sticker. You can use the bottle markings to make sure that you measure out correctly. Now we need to make sure that all of our equipment is sanitized by fully immersing it in the sanitizer solution for at least 1 minute. So in here I've got my brew spoon, my sampler, my airlock, and my hydrometer and test jar. Now that's sat for 1 minute, we need to sanitize the vessel itself. If you can see any visible debris inside your bucket, you need to give it a wash with warm water. If you've got a stain that's really stubborn, you can use VWP or brewer's wash, but you'll need to rinse afterwards as well. Now this sanitizer is no rinse, so once it has been immersed in the bucket or the equipment, you don't need to rinse it as you could risk contamination. One last thing about buckets. If your bucket's got any deep scratches or gashes in the inside, you should replace the bucket. The cost of a new bucket is a couple of pounds or a couple of dollars, whereas the cost of losing an entire batch is a lot more than that. So you don't want to risk it, as bacteria can be harbored in those cracks. Now this vessel actually isn't graduated, and what I mean by that is having an indication where the 5 litre mark is. So what I'm going to do is I've got my 5 litres of sanitizer here pre-measured out, and I'm just going to add it to the bucket. I'm now going to quite simply draw a line along the liquid level, which means that is where we need to fill to. We're now going to measure out 1.95 kilos of honey. Ideal honey varieties for Ultimate Tej are light and fruity, so things like wildflower, clove, sage, that sort of thing. If you've purchased one of our Utabrew boxes with honey, you can add a small amount of water to the container once it's been emptied, as all of our containers come sanitized. And you can give it a shake and then add it directly to the bucket so you aren't missing out on any of that honey goodness. I'm going to measure out honey and then I'll get back to you. Now we've measured out our honey, you want to open up sachet A and add it all directly to the bucket. Now we want to add 2.5 litres of spring water and then mix. In goes our water. And now we mix. If your honey is set like mine is, it will still dissolve, it just needs a bit more elbow grease. Be careful if you've got a steel spoon not to scratch your bucket. Now that we've fully mixed and homogenized all this solution, you want to sanitize your mesh bag. Tear open sachet B and add sachet B to the mesh bag. You then want to tie off the bag with a tight knot and pop it in the bucket. We're now going to add our star ingredient, which is the gesho. This is in sachet B2 and you want to add this directly to the bucket. In it goes. Now we want to add some more water until just below the 5 litre or 1 gallon mark. Our smack pack from earlier should have a little bit of excess air inside now. We want to give it another good shake to make sure that all of the yeast are nice and active. We want to dip one of the corners that we're going to be cutting in sanitizer. Now you can use scissors or you can just gently tear. You don't want to make the hole too big, otherwise the nutrient pack might come out, and then you just want to add the whole bunch. Perfect. Now all we need to do is add our sanitized bucket lid. Put a little bit of sanitizer in your airlock like so, then push it into the grommet and leave this to ferment. You want to store this in a temperature range of 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. 22 degrees is around best. Now, even if this is finished fermenting within 2 weeks, you still want to leave it 2-week mark, maybe even go to 3 weeks, because we want those spices from the spice bag and the gesho to have maximum infusion. Once this is finished fermenting, I'll be back and we'll talk about racking, stabilizing and bottling. Welcome back. It's been around 3 weeks since we started brewing our ultimate tej. Now I've been checking the gravity every few days and it has stabilized. So now what we're going to be doing is racking into our secondary vessel. Now all you're going to need is a glass demijohn, a bung for that vessel with a hole for an airlock, an auto siphon and an elevated surface for our bucket to go onto. Before we rack our mead into our new container, we need to sanitize that and the auto siphon. So we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone by elevating our sanitizer bucket and using our auto siphon to siphon across the sanitizer solution. Now this is the same way that we're going to rack the mead. We use the elevated surface because once we begin pumping, that higher elevation will mean that the liquid will continually come out of the siphon rather than us having to continually pump. And as we did before, we need to make sure that this demijohn is fully immersed in sanitizer solution for at least 1 minute. Now all our equipment is sanitized, all we need to do is lift our bucket up onto an elevated surface, remove the lid, and now all we need to do is pump a few times and the racking process will start. It's best to try and get the receiving end of the siphon to the bottom of your vessel because we want to minimize oxygen exposure, and by the mead dripping into the vessel freely, that would increase the amount of oxygen that it would be exposed to. To make sure you get every last drop, you can gently tilt your vessel towards your siphon to make sure that all of the liquid pools around the siphon. The last thing we need to do today is add our stabilizers. Now it's worth noting, stabilizers inhibit yeast and make sure that fermentation doesn't restart. But it's important to note that once you add stabilizers, they can give a slightly fusely or burnt feeling to the drink for a good month or so. So that's worth noting. It will mellow out with time and it's nothing to worry about. It's what all the big breweries and wineries and meaderies use to ensure beverages are safe. Once your stabilizers are added, all you need to do is give it a very gentle swirl for a couple of seconds just to make sure that it gets fully mixed in. Then we add our airlock to our bung to our vessel, and there we go. That's pretty much Ultimate Tej done. Now this can be bottled after around 24 hours. You just want to make sure that there are no more gases. So if you still have positive pressure in your airlock, keep giving it a swirl until that pressure drops. Ultimate Tej is not supposed to clear. The reason for this is that the proteins that create the haze add unique flavors. So instead of cold crashing, we're going to go ahead and bottle it right away. You can click through to the next video below to watch Adam's video on bottling. I've been Sam from YouTube Brew, and I'll see you next time.